Adonai rohi lo hechsar, bin hod nasher betzayni, alamei menuchot, ינח עליני, נפשי ישובב, ינחני במעגלי צדק, למען שמו, למען שמו, למען שמו. גם כי הלך בגיא צלמוות לא ירא, כי אתה עמתי, שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני, תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי, דישנת בשמן ראשי כוסי רוויה, אך טוב וחסד תרדפוני כל ימי חיי, כל ימי חיי. ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures, and leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. We gather together today as a dear family and friends of Judith Lenore Kramer. As we mourn her loss, we must also celebrate the full, rich life she led. Death has taken our beloved Judy. Friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence there's lamentation. In their tears there is loneliness. Lost in the sorrow may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God, and be with them. For her love that united us in life and which death cannot sever. For her companionship which we shared along life's path and still continues through the tenderness of memory. The gifts of her heart and her mind which brought us joy and happiness and now become a precious heritage of the Spirit. For all these and more, God, we give you our praise. In his sorrow, Job cried out, Adonai Natan, Adonai Lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevarach. God has given, God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. An ancient people were well acquainted with grief and with the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us. Yet the centuries have taught us that a good name endures beyond the grave, and there is strength in faith. With Job we say, Adonai Natan, God you have given. You gave us a loved one who will not be forgotten. For it was good and enduring in her life. We offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. A poem by Kathy Zink. Take time to talk, for you may ask of all things unknown to you. Take time to laugh, for smiles relinquish sorrow and spread happiness. Take time to think, for the realm of knowledge is never ending. Take time to see. There is beauty in every part of the world around you. Take time to feel. For the emotions of your heart often control the reasoning of your mind. Take time to live. For each day is filled with new opportunities that will be gone tomorrow. Take time to dream, for survival is forever challenging the powers of your imagination. Take time to love. The sharing of all these things is the true miracle of life. Proverbs 31. Eshet chayil mi'imsa, v'rok mipni mikra. A woman of valor who can find. She is more precious than fine pearls. Her family trusts in her, and so they lack nothing. She does them good, never harm, all the days of her life. She perceives that her labor is rewarding. Her candle burns on into the night. She reaches out to those in need and extends her hand to the poor. She is clothed in strength and dignity, and she faces the future cheerfully. She speaks with wisdom. The law of kindness is on her lips. Her family rise up and bless her. They sing her praises. Many daughters have done valiantly, but you excel them all. She achieved success, who has lived well, laughed often, and loved much, who has gained the respect of intelligent men and the love of little children, who has filled her niche and accomplished her task, who left the world better than she found it, whether by improved copy, a perfect poem, or a rescued soul, was never lacked appreciation of earth's beauty or failed to express it, was always looked for the best in others and given the best she had, whose life was an inspiration, whose memory a benediction. The Baal Shem Tov, the Hasidic Rebbe, once observed that there are 3 ways we mourn. The first is with tears, the second is with silence, but the third is with song. We mourn someone truly beloved. We experience all 3. Tears at first, then silence as our grief settles more deeply, and finally song as we're able to celebrate the memories we hold deep in our hearts. So this is a time for tears as we say our final goodbyes to Judy. We each remember Judy in our own way. Throughout her life, Judy was a loving mother to Sally and Leonard of blessed memory, Roger and Sylvia, Gary of blessed memory, and Betsy, and their children, Dana and Angela, Barbara, Seth and Stephanie, Lindy and Paul, Merrill and Benji, Josh, Alana and Geely, Paula, Michelle, and Michael. Well, I remember Judy as a devoted grandmother, and Judy was an adoring great-grandmother to Michael, Sydney, Rafi, Micah, Asher, and Jacoby, Ellie, Ramona, Sophie, Max, and Nora, and a dear sister to Jane and Francis. Judy was born on May 2nd, 1924, here in Cleveland, to Molly and Louis Newman. She was the middle child of the 3 girls. The young family lived in Glenville until Judy finished kindergarten, and then they moved to Cleveland Heights. Judy attended Heights High. She claimed that her dog, Chang, would meet her at school and walk her home. Judy married Irvin in 1943 when she was just 18 years old. Then he was sent overseas with the Army. Judy worked for the Navy Department during those years. Irvin came home injured and spent 2 years at the Cleveland Clinic. But after he recovered, Sally was born, then Roger almost 3 years later, and finally Gary 6 years later. But unfortunately, they lost their father very young. Judy's family stepped right up to help. Her parents were like a second set of parents to her children, and her aunts and uncles became a huge part of their lives. Family meant everything to Judy. She made sure that 5 generations remained close and connected, and this is a special gift to all of you. Judy also remained close with many girlfriends from childhood and high school. They used to get together once a month on Saturday mornings, and 10 friends even made it to Judy's 90th birthday party. Judy was a member of Park Synagogue for 95 years. She was confirmed at the Jewish Center. When we celebrated multi-generational families at Shabbat morning services a few years ago, Roger got Judy up on the bima. She was one of our longest members. It was very important to her that her 3 children got a Jewish education at the synagogue. Judy was involved in the sisterhood and loved sitting in her high holiday seats right behind the choir. Alana remembers a discussion about whether or not to have the choir at her bat mitzvah service, which ended with, "Let's have them because Grandma likes the choir." In fact, Judy accompanied Roger to the hiring committee interview when they first heard Cantor Peasman sing. Judy swore it was her that got him the job. Judy was also involved in True Sisters at NCJW, and she became a realtor. Judy was always a major part of her grandchildren's lives. Dana and Barbara called her Judy, and then Seth coined the name Dita because he couldn't say Judy. And that name stuck for Lindy and Merrill until finally Josh could actually say Grandma, which caught on. And then your children called Judy Bub, short for Bubby. Judy always had a huge candy bowl out whenever the kids came over. And Sally's kids remember her bringing huge candy bars over right before dinner time. Seth often came home from school to his grandmother and Officer Wallace waiting outside for him. Judy would come over and let herself in Sally's back door, setting off the burglar alarm on a regular basis. Dana told me that they thought it was absolutely normal to see their grandmother every day. Once Judy walked in on Sally telling a friend over the phone that she was thinking of moving her family to Madison, Wisconsin. Judy rushed home and called Roger screaming. At the same time, Sally was calling Roger in a panic. He yelled at Sally, "You can't leave me alone with Mother." Unfortunately, they remained in Cleveland. Roger, Sylvia, and their kids had Judy over for Shabbat dinner every Friday night. And they all gathered for the holidays, Rosh Hashanah, sometimes Yom Kippur break fast, Passover Seders. Sylvia and Sally would do the cooking. Lindy describes Judy as so fun and so funny. She was a character. When you were with her, you could expect to have tears running down your face from laughing. There are many funny stories, and as the family shared, some you can tell and some you can't. You may remember going to the Olive Garden at the end of Passover. It was filled with other park members who had the same idea. It took over an hour and a half hours to get the food, and it was all cold. Let's just say Judy complained a bit. I hope the memories of that dinner with Judy can still make you laugh today. Judy was used to keeping her living room pristine. When the children walked in, they had to put their hands up so not to touch anything. When Lindy, Paul, and their kids were living with Roger and Sylvia, Judy couldn't understand how they were letting the kids roam wild and have their toys everywhere. Ellie remembers Bub sitting at the end of the table next to Roger, and their dog liked to hang out there because Judy dropped the food. Judy would yell, "Get the dog away from me," but she really liked her. Roger and Sally helped to take wonderful care of Judy. After Sally's death, it fell to Roger and Sylvia. Roger was completely devoted to his mother, and she was very reliant on him. At the beginning of quarantine, Roger made arrangements for Judy to come to the window of the activities room so he could visit with her through the glass. A Beechwood policeman drove by and wanted to throw him out. Roger and Sally had made a pact, and Roger never told Judy that Sally had passed away. Judy often asked where Sally was, but Roger and the wonderful Walensky staff made excuses for the last 8 months. They thought it would just bring her too much pain, especially after the loss of Gary. They chose to protect her from the loss, and as Roger told me, Judy had great highs and great lows throughout her entire life. So today is a time for tears as we're saddened by the loss of Judy, but we recall all that we learned from her and especially how to care for one another. Let these tears serve to strengthen and uphold you as a family. There's a story in our tradition about a rabbi who once passed an old woman planting trees. "Old woman," he called, "why are you planting those trees? You'll never live to see them blossom." But the woman replied, "My ancestors planted trees not for themselves, but for us, that we might enjoy their shade and their fruit. I too do the same for all those who will come after me." Judy planted an orchard for each one of us, an orchard filled with devotion and with love, and these will always be here for us. We must be grateful that we're able to share in Judy's life. I am so sorry your family has suffered much loss in the past year. All our thoughts and prayers are with you during this difficult time. But we pray that tomorrow there'll be fewer tears more silence. As a Baal Shem Tov knew, there'll be a time for pondering, for contemplation. Judy will become a greater part of our characters and our being, so we integrate the memories and the values she taught us into our own selves. But finally there'll become a time for song. There'll come a time where we can celebrate Judy, recall all that we learned from her, and how she touched each of our lives. May she rest in peace. Zecher Siracha Livracha. May the memory of Judith Kramer be a blessing. Let's all say amen.
Amen.
I'd like to invite Roger to come up to share some personal words about his mother, and then we'll hear from Dana and Josh.
I thought to myself often that would I ever be able to speak at my mother's funeral? I didn't have the opportunity to even attend my father's funeral, much less give me the opportunity to speak. My mother gave me strength to speak. And maybe I was a little bit obsessive about taking care of Mom, but it was precipitated by her father, by my grandfather, who lost his mother in Europe and was raised by a mean old stepmother. And I knew her. She was a mean person. But my grandfather used to say to me, you take care of your mother. You only have one mother in this world, and you take care of her. He always missed his mother. Like Sharon said, my mother's life was one of extremes. Extreme highs, graduations, marriages, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Extreme lows, deaths, illnesses, those expected and those not. Gary's loss was the worst 13 years ago, but in true character, she survived. Sally and I decided when the time came not to tell her about Sally's death, and we all understood, and no one ever told her. But I really think in some ways she knew. I find myself in the same place my mother was in, outliving both siblings and both parents. A real extreme low. But just like Mom, I'll balance those dark places with the high places. A sporting wife, 4 terrific kids who loved Grandma Judy to pieces, grandchildren who were the apples of her eyes, and great-grandchildren who were a real bonus. Mom belonged to a group of lifelong friends who met monthly on Saturdays for lunch for 25 years. It was after she stopped driving that Sally started driving her to lunch, and I would pick her up. I went early to pick her up to listen to the conversations between these 10 women. I would not be able to repeat most of them. But her friend Nettie was a lifelong Democrat, and Mom was a lifelong Republican. You can imagine the battles between these two ladies. But they maintained their lifelong friendship until Nettie's passing years ago. One story that she loved to retell, and her girlfriends and our family knew the story verbatim, was when she was in high school. Long polished fingernails were against the dress code. Of course, my mother had long fingernails that were painted red with polish. Her advisor reprimanded her, took her to the office, and went to go get a clipper to cut off the nails. At that time, she snuck out the window and went home. Just an example of what a character she was. She had a rule. She heard a rule. She did what she wanted to do anyway. And her response always was, don't tell me what to do. High point in her life was her 90th birthday party at Sally's house. All 10 of them were there, and many more were there also. Our children were the transportation service to get her friends there. We had the East Coast custard truck, which reminded them of Euclid Beach ice cream. We have the picture of my mom and her friends all on my sister's deck, all having a great time. I had 2 aunts in this world. Both of them were remaining. Both of them were married to brothers of my father. One had her 97th birthday in November. The other one had her 97th birthday a couple months ago. The one who had her birthday a couple months ago died yesterday. Mom was in her glory that day. The kids have been stellar in sending me video after video after video. I have one of her at her birthday party. But the picture that was on the Berkowitz-Kumin website and in the paper this morning was taken that day. It captured her true spirit. Rest in peace, Mom. Well, I'll miss you.
All right, short but sweet. I could have written and I could speak forever about the stories about Grandma Judy, but I was told that it has to be clean, so it's short. What Grandma Judy has meant to me in my life. When I was born, Grandma was 46 years old, which is just about the same age that I was when Asher was born. So truly my relationship with Grandma was not quite what one might expect of a grandma and a granddaughter. I wasn't allowed to call her Grandma, so I called her by her first name, Judy. And then Barbara called her Judy, and then Seth, who, when he began to speak, couldn't quite say Judy, so she became Dida. Judy wasn't your average grandma to me. She was an integral part of a daily life when I was little. I saw her every day. Either she came to our house or we went to her house, but we were together at least once a day. I just thought that was normal when I grew up. A bit later, as I met friends and made friends on my street, my friends would say, "You're so lucky you get to see your grandma so much." And I began to realize that her presence in life was very special. That we were lucky. Lucky that we had a grandma that lived in town. Lucky that we had a grandma that was young and independent, who could drive and visit us and bring us treats. Always treats. King-size candy bars, bags of sweetest fish. And she always came right before dinner. As she would enter the house, she would whisper, "Don't tell your mother." And she'd open her purse and display her selection of the day. As soon as I was old enough, I would ask to sleep over just about every weekend. And whatever Grandma did on Saturday or Sunday, I did with her. Whether it was a trip to the grocery store or a trip to the movie theater, I always got to go along, even when it was totally inappropriate. The story she liked to tell the best was when she took me to shopping at the Pick and Pay, and I wouldn't sit still in the cart, and the woman at the checkout told me to listen to my mother. And I looked at her with a poker straight face and said, "That's not my mother, that's my grandmother." To which Grandma said, "Don't ever tell someone that again." Our relationship definitely changed over the years as we both grew up. And although she was a grandmother and I didn't need a second mother, she was always there for me. And I always saw her as more than just my grandma. Sometimes she took care of me, and sometimes I took care of her. Sometimes she visited me, and sometimes I visited her. Most of the best memories in life involve Grandma Judy, and I pray that those memories will last us all a lifetime to come.
Before I start, these remarks are not my own alone. They're also my sister's remarks. I am just the messenger here. So this is to be delivered as a group. But before I start, I have to confess something to everyone. It's Grandma told me something all of her life, and I've got to reveal it to you all. It's a revelation.
Objection.
It's a revelation. She told me in private. She told me in public. I was her favorite grandchild. I was her favorite grandchild. She told me this. I promise.
She told everybody.
In actuality, Grandma Judy made this same whispered confession, sometimes even shouting it to a crowded room, to each and every one of us, her 10 grandchildren. And it felt true, and it was true every single time she said it.
Yep.
Before I go on about what it was like to be her grandchild, we all want to say that our father Roger was an incredibly dedicated son to Judy, ensuring that she was as comfortable as she could possibly be even before she entered any sort of assisted living. Our Aunt Sally and our Uncle Gary, too, were extremely devoted children, each taking care of Judy in times of her life when she needed extra attention. Judy was immensely proud of all three of her children and their many accomplishments, and we can all learn a lot from them and how they cared for their mother in her later years. Okay. Grandma Judy was a savvy woman, and in many ways she was very independent. For about 30 years, she lived in her Shaker Towers condominium, driving herself, often against the advice of ophthalmologists and the Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicles, to and from all of our houses for family functions, as well as to various engagements with her dear friends from high school. She lived this cosmopolitan life until the ripe age of 80, when she moved into a new construction home that she designed herself. Grandma was so excited to have had full control of something she built, a brand new, beautiful place. All of us got to enjoy its cathedral ceilings, gleaming kitchen, the bottomless crystal bowl of fun-sized candy bars. Grandma knew precisely what she liked and what she didn't like, and all of that showed in her decision to make this move. Although, this move would not have been everyone's choice for our grandmother to make. While her independence waned, it showed us a great deal about Grandma's tenacity to do things her own way. In this same vein, Grandma was always able to be very direct when responding to suggestion. Grandma, why aren't you using your walker? Don't tell me what to do. This stubbornness is something we will always remember, and certainly something we can all hear her saying in our minds, or say out loud in her voice. When my sisters grew up and left home, they both remembered and wanted to recreate Grandma Judy's cabbage and noodles and cheese, jello mold, sweet kugel, and beef stew recipes. Memories from very large and boisterous family dinners that Grandma used to host at her condominium. When they called her to ask about how to make these dishes, Grandma answered in a very beloved grandma way, "What do you need that recipe for?" And then she delved into a very mishmash way of describing how she made these delicacies. First, you take a bag of noodles and you boil it. Put in a little of this, then a little of that, like this, like this, like this. When they asked for some more precise measurements, Grandma was never able to say how much exactly, but we've done our best, and we've tried to replicate these memories in our recipe books. When those large family meals were coming to an end at the end of the evening, and we began getting up from our tables, Grandma would always coax everyone to sit back down and relax and enjoy the fruits of her labor. She'd say, "Sit, relax, don't rush me, don't rush me." Grandma was so funny despite having endured so much loss in her life. Lindy remembered in third grade, when Judy was only about 70 years old at the time, writing a biography about her for school, and learning that she had lost 2 sisters and both of her parents too early in their lives. She carried these losses with her quietly throughout the rest of her life. And we know she carried so much pain with her, especially after the loss of our Uncle Gary. But through it all, she created new memories with her family and always appreciated good food and good company. Even with the diagnosis of dementia, she was still quite sharp and very happy to be around people. Later in life, Judy's joy in being surrounded by family and friends combined in interesting ways with her failing eyesight and memory. I can recall her proudly announcing to a crowded room, perhaps at a Passover Seder, "I know all these people." And then, in a hushed tone, turning to me and saying, "Who are all these people?" But she was so happy to be among all these people. We watched over the past couple of years as Grandma's forgetfulness took over, but she never lost that Grandma spark of silliness. She was always the center of attention and the star of the show. With just a few remarks, she would have the entire room roaring with laughter. We will always remember how much fun we had when we were with her and her devotion to her family. It was a privilege to be her grandchild. We will miss Grandma Judy always.
Thank you all for your beautiful words, very personal, from the heart. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination. But life is a journey, a going, a growing from stage to stage. From childhood to maturity and youth to age. From innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing. From foolishness to discretion, then perhaps to wisdom. From weakness to strength, or strength to weakness, and often back again. From health to sickness, and back we pray to health again. From offense to forgiveness. From loneliness to love. From joy to gratitude, and pain to compassion, and grief to understanding. From fear to faith. From defeat to defeat to defeat. Until looking backward or ahead, we see victory lies not at some high place along the way, but having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination. But life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage made stage by stage to life everlasting. Amen.
Amen.
I ask you now to please rise if you're able for El Malei Rachamim.
Hail, Malei Rachamim, Shochayna Bamramim, Ametzemeno Hanechonam, Tachat Kanafei Ashkinah, במחלות קדושים עוד גורים, כזוהר הרקיע המסגירים, את נשמת יהודית לאה בת לבה ומלכה, שהלכה לעולמה, בגן עדן תחי מנוחתך. אנא במלא רחמים, אסתירנה בסתר כנפך לעולמים, ותצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתם, אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר אמן.
Compassionate God, eternal spirit of our universe, grant perfect resting and sheltering presence to our beloved Judith Lenore Kramer, known in our tradition as Judith Leah Bat Leva V'Malka, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in your eternal presence, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace, and let us all say, Amen.
Want to do the Kaddish here?
Well, we'll do Kaddish before we do birth. I think we're going to go, I'll do a reading while the family takes a turn to go up and place some earth on the coffin. Do we return here for Kaddish, or do you prefer to do it? Okay, so you head up and do earth, and we'll say the Kaddish from up there. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we will remember her. In the blowing of wind and the chill of winter, we remember her. In the opening of buds and the rebirth of spring, we remember her. In the rustling of leaves and the beauty of autumn, we remember her. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember her. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember her. When we have joy as we yearn to share, remember her. So long as we live, she too shall live, for she is now part of us as we remember her.